Thank you, James and Scott and the whole Swayable team for having me. We have a lovely panel assembling here for you guys. Thank you all for joining. Alrighty, so our first panel was all about, mapping the landscape and persuading through chaos. And now we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty here with how the mechanics of persuasion are changing. As I'm sure all of you know, the change is a lot to keep up with, from AI avatars that can target messages to audiences in real time in different languages to AI-generated podcasts made from PDFs. I don't know if you guys have played with Notebook LM, but it's very fun. To disruption in search, which Max alluded to in the last panel, which is very interesting. It's a lot to keep up with. So we want to get into the dynamics of how all of these things are affecting the work that this industry does, and unpack how the business of persuasion is shaping creative strategy and media decisions. So once again, I'm Kendra Barnett with Adweek. Great panel here for you today. I'm going to introduce them. First, to my left, we have Danny Zhu, Director of Digital and Performance Marketing at Jaguar LandRover. Next, we have Faön Mahunik, EVP of Strategy and Analysis at Influential. And finally, Russell Pinke, Data Strategy Director at Wieden+Kennedy. Thank you all so much for being here. So my first question is just designed to get a sense of the lay of the land here. It's a very big one, so let's try to keep it relatively tight so we can get into some of the more fun details. But in your view, what are some of the most significant technological disruptions happening in this space today, and what opportunities and challenges do they present? Just a light one to kick us off. And I'm going to open the floor to whoever would like to weigh in first.
Yeah, I think my hot take on this when we met last week was effectively in this moment, social listening is dying. It's still incredibly powerful, but it needs to be reborn. It doesn't match the needs of what social media is today. It is largely about reading captions, and it doesn't capture all of the content that happens in images, in videos, in podcasts, all of the different media streams that are lost in social listening, which is very limited to words on a tweet. And it is increasingly Twitter-based and AI-based, and it is just slop after slop after slop, to use the words they were using in the last panel.
I think a lot about the walled gardens and the ability to get data to help inform what I'm doing from an audience standpoint, or even understanding how that's changing the data landscape. I love to think about the influencers that I'm working with and how they're sort of like the next go-to for data. They hold such a wealth of information that I think is so untapped. And so I think that the walled gardens, sort of the fading digital signals that we have, how can we look to other areas to explore and expand there?
Yeah, totally agree. I think the technology in our space is changing so quickly. I hate to be the first person to bring up the word AI. I think we should have a swear jar here.
I was gonna wait
for this panel. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities from AI to help us understand our consumers better, and to build a stronger connection to them as a marketer.
Yeah, I think those are all really relevant points. And it's interesting that I asked the question, what's the most disruptive technology? And two of you mentioned kind of key challenges, the death of social listening and, the walled gardens and the loss of signal in the open web. I was going to ask, in this industry, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, but what are proving the most useful in marketing and advertising, and how are you using them in your day-to-day?
Yeah, I can start. I think there's one tool that we are particularly excited about, which is a tool that helps us understand the consumer psychology. So I work for a company where my CMO has a behavioral science background, and my CEO is also a professor in marketing. So, that's the opportunity and challenge at the same time. I started to really become obsessed with a lot of the consumer psychological, behaviors, and how we find a way to understand what they care about and what predicts their, buying decisions. Because we're talking about the decision of buying like 100,000 plus, car, and it's like a longer term decision. So we work with the company to create this tool that allows us to create kind of like a consumer profile for each of our model. And it's so powerful these days because you would imagine that you probably need like a psychology PhD to understand some of those insights, but then AI can explain it to you in such an easy way. Some of the examples we find out are in like when people make their car buying decisions, there are two types of people. One is called locomotion and the other is called assessor. Assessor is the people who will just start an Excel sheet and look at all of the options and do those side-by-side comparisons. And they'll find most, like the weighted average of each of the options and get them a score. That's how they make their decision. It's also how my wife make her decision. I'm on the opposite end. I'm more like locomotion, meaning that I like to see things progressing. I like to just, go to the dealer and test drive the car and, just make fast and more impulsive decisions. And it also happens to be the same consumer profile for one of our model, which is Range Rover Sport. But if we look at the competitors, BMW, for example, their customers are more like the assessors. That gives us the opportunity to then customize our message to our consumers, but also customize our message for the conquesting campaigns, because we know the other consumers like to see those, stats and do those side-by-side comparisons. So that's just like one powerful tool we've been using recently.
I'll go next. I think for us at Influential, being able to move at the speed of culture is incredibly important. And so a lot of us being able to leverage technologies such as AI to help do our jobs more quickly. I'm not going to say better. Things like being able to use AI to help create and curate creative briefs so that we can get the details more quickly to our creatives and our creators, being able to use technology and tools and resources in order to better identify when we aren't being brand safe in our content and creative, and so that we're not getting that hang up before we get approvals from our brands. And then I think lastly, and I sort of buried my lead there a little bit, being able to get deeper in with audience data and the connection to the influencers, right? Knowing that influencer Faön has a following of, 150,000 people who are really niche and care about her and the brand she's connected to, being able to uncover and that connection piece are kind of areas in which we're in the tech that we're using to build that out a bit more. So I think it's really exciting to be able to leverage technology in that way.
Yeah, I think we talked about this the other day, but I think I've been valuing the influencer space for learning so much more than I ever had before. It used to be we used influencers to get our message out there, but now using influencers as a sounding board for what's working, what's out there has been really, really powerful. But to add another technology, I think there was a big push maybe a year or two ago around AI in surveys and focus groups. And I think there was a big backlash because it was like, wait, are you having AIs fill out the surveys? That seems weird. That seems like a bad way to do this. But there are now vendors that are more focused on how do I use AI to scale surveys and focus groups? How do I use AIs to generate hundreds of moderators of focus groups? So there's still real humans doing the actual thing, but I can get hundreds of responses from moderators and focus groups and surveys in matter of hours versus weeks. So the two, Remesh AI is one that I'm loving right now. Simpler is another one that I love that just does it the opposite way. They're using AI to power the analyst, not using AI to fake the results.
A quick follow-up for you, Russell. On the creative side and at a powerhouse like Wieden, do you encounter clients who are more or less wary about embracing technology, especially in the creative process, and how do you respond to either that enthusiasm or that hesitancy?
Yeah, it's a challenge, I think, especially on the creative side. Creatives are still very wary of losing their jobs to AI. So they are just holding back on leveraging these tools. And I keep sort of bringing up, but we could just use this to make 100 ideas. You still get to pick the right idea and you still get to polish the right idea, but let's use it to get ourselves going. So within our culture, it's tough. I think within clients, you have to find the nerds. I had a call with some great clients the other day. They were super nerded out about me showing them AI stuff. I could have that same call with other clients and they would just go, cool, I don't really get what I'm supposed to do with this. So yeah, I'm always trying to find the nerds. I keep talking about having integrated data teams across agency partners, across brands. How do we have, there are lots of times where the account people meet and the creative teams meet, but there's not a lot of times when like all the nerds from all the other agencies meet and get to geek out about stuff. So I'm trying to create those councils.
Yeah, great. So one topic that the last panel touched on a lot that I thought was really interesting was the element of trust, which is becoming increasingly important. I want to talk about authenticity in that similar vein. You know, in a media landscape that's increasingly flooded with not only synthetic media or AI augmented media, but also outright misinformation a lot of times, you know, how are we heading toward a crisis of credibility, and how do you navigate those challenges? Danny, I wanted to kick this over to you because we had a conversation about, you know, Jaguar talking internally about using AI voices and whether that, in speaking of creative, you know, in that process would diminish some trust or sense of authenticity of the brand. So maybe you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think, yeah, it's an internal, I wouldn't call it like debate, but discussion that we've been having of whether to use some of the AI tools to speed up our creative content creation. I actually see the gentleman who I learned the stats the other day at the ARF conference. I think, you know, like there's interesting study that, you know, like we've seen about using the real human voice versus AI generated voice in like audio ads. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, I remember the key takeaway is that if you don't disclose the ad, you know, it's being made by AI. And if you measure, you know, sentiment like brand favorability or awareness, there's not really like a big difference. Probably because like, you know, the AI audio is like so good, like you can't really tell the difference. But when you actually disclose the ad is being made by AI and then do the comparison with the real human voice, there's still not like a huge drop, I think. But if you look at that data by age group, that's where it comes interesting. I guess like if anyone wants to guess, you know, which age group will have the biggest bias against the AI-made voice, right? If you think about like 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, I think most people will guess like maybe like the older generation. But I think the result is the opposite. It's actually the younger people who are more aware and, you know, to some extent concerned about, you know, using the AI voice, whether that's going to harm the authenticity of the brand. So I think, yeah, I don't have the answer on this one, but I think it is important for us to know our audience and, you know, our value, their value, what they care about, and really be mindful of, you know, when we create this guidance around the use of AI in our creative.
I heard a story this morning about this that I wanted to bring up, though, is while I think that's true, I thought there was a piece of work that Nike did for Black Lives Matter and that our agency worked on, and it was just a list of all the names of the people who were affected by Black Lives Matter. And I was speaking to somebody who worked on the VO of it, and the VO was just listing names. That was it. There was no script. It was just say the names. And I know that an AI would have faltered in that because name pronunciation is not inherently something AI is going to understand. So to the question of authenticity, there are also moments where it's like, all of that be damned, it can't do this. There's no way it could pronounce 100 unique names off the shelf. You know?
Yeah, I think that I'd said this the other day, that trust becomes like the ultimate currency for connection to brands, and being able to leverage that technology in a smart way, and being able to make those connections between your audiences and your brands is really the most important thing. And like for me, I think about having how media is always changing in that aspect, and how for me, creators are the biggest trust engine, right? And I think for a lot of brands, they're essentially the king of all opt-in, right? And so I think that inherently unlocks a little bit of trust in a way that is uniquely a little bit different, and adds that human lens to the technology that's being leveraged across media channels broadly.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I have to say, even the influencer space is being disrupted with AI. You know, I think last summer TikTok debuted a suite of tools called Symphony, I think. You guys probably know better than I do. But including like realistic AI avatars of real influencers to like share a branded message. Like, does that impact how users or audiences view the authenticity of the creators they love, Faön?
Yeah, I think it does, right? I think that there's this to the point of audience fatigue even becoming with AI curated content, right? People don't know what to believe and how to believe it. And then here I am saying creators are, the most trustworthy people because they can kind of speak to the brand in the way that they mean. But then we have like an avatar or a perceived influencer that isn't really speaking the truth. So I think that there is kind of some caution around that. I think there's the level of being able to know that influencers can be more about creating content and being able to leverage them for curation around brands. But yeah, I think that's it's tricky.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch that space evolve. And speaking of TikTok, I just wanted to talk about our evolving media landscape. It's weird. I was actually listening to a podcast earlier about how it's interesting that we've seen this rise in short form, and there's all this talk about attention diminishing, but at the same time, like long form podcasts are really having a moment. It's a very confusing kind of paradox to me of like, where is attention living, and how do we adapt to all these new forms and how audiences interact with media? So that's a big way of introducing a big question, which is, how are marketers adapting their tactics to fit those new formats and modes of attention?
I don't know if they are doing it well yet. It's tough. It's unrealistic, honestly, for most marketers. I think just like anything in this space, brands get excited about a new technology and they say, we want to build our version of that. Let us build that. And then they don't realize, okay, you spend $100,000 to build it at first, and then $1 million upkeeping it every year, and then $1 million on top of that to keep upkeeping it. And so things like we just launched for McDonald's a Twitch channel. I don't think anyone fully realizes, like, 4 hours of content, 9 hours of content. These are incredibly expensive things. So I think there's a push towards the shorter because it can be cheaper, but you still shoot 10 hours of content to get 3 minutes of footage on the paper. So I think it's going to be really hard from a budgetary standpoint to ever really get great at flexible content sizes, except for where AI can probably supplement a lot of that.
Yeah. The way I see this is it's not an either or between short form and long form. We are doing a lot of testing with attention measurement with companies out there that use AI to look at attention score. And the way I see attention, there are two components. One is the quality of the creative or the content, and the other is the quality of the placement of that media. You need to have both to really, drive the attention. And the way that, the attention can help us understand the effectiveness of our media is that it gives us a threshold, right? If, let's say, you need to hit a certain amount of attention to really break through and to resonate, and to have your message resonate with the consumer. And you have so many ways to hit that, threshold. You can have Super Bowl ads, right? You can have, maybe a few big TV hits, or you can have a ton of small, short form videos on TikTok or other social media platforms. But likely you need to have a combination of both. And then having a way to measure, what is the most cost efficient way of hitting that threshold. But I think, yeah, I'm optimistic because we have a lot of those technologies now can help us understand the attention score and how to improve it and to help us improve our media placement.
I think even beyond attention, living in a world where we can measure reaction to tone, to the type of content, to the feeling that they're feeling when they're seeing it. Because if I can measure content when I'm inappropriately laying in bed in the morning, doom scrolling maybe, right? My feeling towards something might be totally different than when I'm on a busy subway. And so I think that that kind of information and data and measurement of the content that we're all placing, I think is incredibly important in its evolution.
So I also wanted to talk about, because we're here with Swayable, I wanted to talk about testing and measurement. So, so with the feedback loop kind of changing between creators, clients, audiences, how is, testing persuasion weighing into your decision making, and what surprises you about what is persuading people these days?
I mean, it's incredibly important to what I do. And it's important for me to be able to proof out the why in what we're doing. And I think it's also, for me, being able to have the additive layer of why persuasion exists throughout the entire funnel from an influencer standpoint, right? Especially for some of my bigger brands, where we think it only lives in certain bits and bobs. But yeah, I'm always measuring. I think, like I just alluded to, being able to measure in different ways is incredibly important. Being able to connect that to ROI is ever evolving, and so I think that's kind of like the next big unlock, especially in testing across content and influencers.
Yeah, I think, to build onto that, I think, it's important to understand the context when consumers consume your message, right? If it's early morning or when you're like, really stressed or not. The other thing we find interesting is that we're, like a lot of those testings we're doing is to try to deconstruct a specific creative and see which element of that creative actually moves the needle for us. Because in a more traditional way, we have like a 30-second TV spot, right? And that's like our hero spot, and we're putting so much pressure on just that one piece of creative to work, to do all the persuasions, and it's kind of like you make it or you fake or you fail. Like it's so much pressure. But now with a lot of those technologies, we're able to actually like break down the 30-second and see like what are the elements in the ad actually drives people's like emotion, right? We can do a lot of those, fun exercise. And then we can restruct a 30-second into 5 different versions and then test it again, or cut it down into like different versions of 15s or 6s. So I think like the ability for us to, like create all of those variations and test it multiple variations at scale and at speed is really what enables us to be more powerful at our, persuasion capability. Because previously, like every time we run an ad, like a TV commercial, just the process of, like producing that ad, testing it, it takes months, if not longer. Right now with the AI capability, now with all the platform partners, we can test multiple variations in a much faster way.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be so critical. I think the pendulum is swinging. It used to be everything was tested. Everything was focus group 20 years ago. That was so the standard. Then digital came in and social came in, and it was like, well, but we can get all this data for free. This is just like all here. We posted it. We got free data. Why do we need to bother testing? I think now we're swinging back towards the need for testing. But to that point, content timelines have shortened so much that the traditional way of testing that took weeks or months can't be allowed. So I'll do the soft sell. Platforms like Swayable allow you to do that kind of testing in a manner that is hopefully up to the speed needs of your clients and your presentations and all those things. But I hope that we start spending more money on the upfront testing and then trusting the results and then letting it run, rather than always looking at the attribution modeling, the MMMs, and all those post metrics that are fuzzy at times. Not one ad doesn't make me buy any one thing, but testing it and knowing it critically did the thing, it persuaded the person, it did something to their brain. Now I'm just going to trust that, and I'm going to trust my media buy, and I'm going to trust it beyond that is what I would hope to see the industry swing back towards a little bit.
All right, so near the end of this conversation, I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit and give us some more kind of context to this whole conversation, which is a little bit what the first panel did. Like in the broader landscape here, I wanted to talk about political divisiveness, basically. How does your calculus change? What changes in your strategy in trying to navigate this landscape? And are there technologies that are helping you do so?
Yeah, and this was my story to jump in with again, but I think this is where a lot of the technology that I've been somewhat soft on lately is really helpful. The real-time stuff is amazing. we had an amazingly bizarre moment on McDonald's when Trump came and decided to work at a McDonald's, which was not sanctioned, but we had to tolerate it. At that same moment, we also had an E. coli outbreak, which hopefully none of you heard about because it was so buried by this Trump news. And then Trump got blamed for the E. coli outbreak. So it was an absolutely fascinating week as we freaked out about this thing happening. Then me and my team were analyzing and going, it seems like Republicans are excited about this because it feels fun to them. Democrats know that Trump is a bullshit machine and are understanding that this is probably bullshit, and they're not blaming McDonald's for it. So it's sort of a net zero for us. And then the E. coli thing happened, and Trump got blamed for it. So he was a foil that protected us. And it was absolutely not how I would have ever thought that moment would have happened. But we kind of just went, I think we're good. I think we're good. And yeah, so we've had a bunch of those on McDonald's. Yeah, where, you can't believe that's how it shook out. So yeah, that was one of the frontline moments that we lived through.
Hard one to follow, I think.
I was gonna say I don't know.
Jaguar rebrand.
Yeah, that was another big PR moment. Yeah, I thought people forgot about after so long. No, not too long.
Open.
I guess, yeah. I mean, to some extent, I think, it is a story that, a lot of people will say, like, going to, like, the future business school case studies. I do think we managed to make it out, like, as a success story, not only about just all of the impressions and exposure the brand received, but I think it's also put us to rethink about, like, how we should connect to the right audience, right? Because I feel like these days you go on to, like, social media, it's all like negative news. I think someone said that if you feel good about yourself, just open your social media. I feel like there is a bias there, right? We talked about a lot of those behavioral science stuff. There is this confirmation bias. I think we do have a lot of, like, more, traditional Jaguar customers or owners, who are not ready to jump onto this completely new brand direction with us. But at the same time, we see a lot of, excitement from the new customers, the younger customers who are, more open-minded to this type of brand transition. And I think consistency is the key, right, to build the authenticity. I think we will continue to move forward and to, kind of like, bring back the Jaguar brand, in this new completely design.
I just want to say we were jealous of that because the work was fantastic, but also to the political divisiveness point, we were getting ready with one of our automobile brands to do something large the week the tariffs got announced, basically, and we had to shelve it 6 months. We just had to say we just got to wait until all of this noise. And so you got in under the wire. You got in a few months before everything got crazy.
It's all about timing.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think at the end of the day, it's like really about that trust and authenticity, kind of out shouting what's happening in the world around us. And so whether we're able to test into it, or we're able to, like, understand our audiences more clearly and what's going to resonate with them regardless of what we're doing, I think that's kind of the easiest way to navigate the world in which we're living in there.
Well, Russell, I'm glad you mentioned the tariffs because I want to talk about that too. Well, I want to talk about trade uncertainty at large and economic uncertainty. How are, maybe the short term is that perhaps there's a cooling effect in media spend, perhaps not. What are you guys seeing? And is there also some longer term anxiety happening about, brands reevaluating the ROI of Persuasion? And yeah, what's your take?
I mean, it manifests differently on every brand. I work on Delta as well, and with them, for the first time ever, they didn't put a projection for the coming year as to what their income was going to be. For the first time ever, they said, we just don't know. There's too many unknowns right now. We're not going to even give the stock market a number. We're just going to say, we'll see you when you see you, which was unprecedented, I think, in the industry at large. So that is how that happens. On a McDonald's, I was asked to do an audit of Joe Rogan's page and RFK Jr.'s page to find out all the weird things that they might decide to turn into policy that we need to be aware of ahead of time. So, yeah, it can just every brand is looking at every piece of their vertical process, I think, and thinking about how might this impact us here, 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 and here, and then planning accordingly.
It's about, I think Persuasion is about being smarter and kind of being able to work around it and identify the gaps and opportunities in order to kind of navigate.
Yeah, I feel like in this moment of a lot of chaos and uncertainty, I think it reminds us to think about what is not changing for our industry and as a marketer. And one of that is to build that long-term relationship with our customers and to continue to use the power of storytelling to build our brand equity. Because I think like those are the things that will help stabilize, bring more like longer-term stabilization to our brand. I know it's hard not to overreact to certain things. I think obviously we're looking at different scenarios. We're looking at what kind of like flexibility we have with our strategy, with our media plans. But I do think it kind of like re-emphasized the importance of having a strong brand, because only the strong brand can, a lot of those crises you see, like strong brand actually come out even stronger. And I think like that comes back to like building the brand equity and like making people want to stay with your brand like despite any like external chaos or uncertainty.
You reminded me of a quote I love, which is, technology moves fast, but people don't. And coming back to where we started this conversation of AI and avatars, AI avatars have existed for like 20 years. There was a very famous Japanese pop star who was just a digital form, and there was no human, there was no nothing. It was a completely open source file that anyone could create anything they wanted with her. She was one of the biggest people in Japan 20 years ago, and we're just now again having this avatars conversation. So the technology can get there 20 years ago, but sometimes it takes a lot of
the QR codes, right?
Right.
1994
with
the cars, right? That's where it all started.
And then COVID brought it back, and yeah. Well, yeah, everyone wants to bring Clippy back. He's definitely got an AI counterpart somewhere.
Okay, awesome. Well, we need to wrap up, so we're going to do a quick rapid fire. If our audience here leaves with just one takeaway, what should they remember? Just give us one quick line, and then we'll open it up for a couple questions.
I guess I'll say just get ready to learn to be comfortable of being uncomfortable.
I think being able to trust in the persuasion of things is important, and that being able to make that connection with your brands and consumers is key.
I wrote down, persuasion is subliminal. We often think too much in marketing about how did this thing exactly result in a sale. And most of what we do is slowly moving people over time. So persuasion is more subliminal than direct.
All right, I love it. We have time for a few questions, so if you have a question, hit us.
I have a simple question, which is, can you share what that psychographic platform is?
You can talk offline or at the happy hour.
Hi, I'm Katie Donovan. I run the growth strategy for the WNBA, and that is inclusive of everything data and analytics underneath that. So everything that you guys have been saying has really been resonating. I'm particularly curious about how you each tackle data illiteracy, either internally or externally with your audiences.
I think I apply a marketer's approach to it. When I got into this industry, I had a math degree. I started talking about chi-squared regression modeling and all sorts of fancy stuff. And a bunch of marketers looked at me and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I figured out that I got to just figure out how to communicate with pie graphs, bar graphs, simple math, and then methodology slides and all that. But yeah, I had to take a very marketer's approach to how do I make sure this is persuasive, not just data for the sake of me feeling like I did the right stuff. But it's a constant challenge. You constantly have to re-educate people about the metrics and how they work and what they don't do and what they do. But that's what we do in marketing, is we're constantly educating.
Yeah, just to pile on the education piece, I think yesterday is very different than today, right? And so being able to ensure that we're tracking on the newest of the new, well documenting the things that are resonating and working well. I work in a sales-based org. I can't have these salespeople running off saying things that I can't produce upon, right? And so making sure that everybody's educated across the board is really key.
Yeah, it's a question that's been on my mind because our team is rolling out our first MMM at the company, and we're pretty excited about it. But obviously, we have a lot of internal stakeholders who are not really like familiar with, a lot of this modeling. But we wanted to, build the trust with them and to show the authenticity and credibility of the model. So I don't have a perfect answer, but my experience always feels like, if you use an analogy that people can all understand, maybe like I like to use like a sports analogy. Like what different roles like, marketing channels play. If you're playing like a basketball game, you're not always like the scorer, but you also need people who pass the ball or who rebound the ball. So I feel like, I always love for like a really easy analogy for people to grasp those concepts that are complicated.
First of all, I love y'all's comments up here. Sorry I had to come up a little bit late. My name is Jalen Coleman. I'm a senior strategist at Click Health. My question actually is for you, Danny. I love the description that you were able to give about the practical use of how you were able to use Swayable in order to take that 30-second spot, test it, and then even create even more versions from that 5-minute, for that 5-second segment that you saw was actually going to be the one that persuaded the audience itself. I think coming from the agency life, how do you go about, in a sense, convincing the client that it is better to spend the money up front about the testing? Because I think that we're not only trying to disrupt persuasion, I'm trying to disrupt the process that a lot of clients have gotten really ingrained into. So the idea of telling my PM to add on an extra step can be a little bit of a difficult conversation to have with the client. So I was curious to know about, and anyone else can weigh in as well, about, as a marketer that's already convinced about the importance of using a tool like Swayable in the upfront, so that way we're not just, like you kind of alluded to, in the back end, like just hoping that it works. How do you go about disrupting that with a client who may have already been in the traditional process and they're comfortable with what they're doing?
I guess, and feel free to chime in. Just so I understand your question, you're talking about the process that client has that is more traditional, that put more efforts into like upfront, but you want to convince them to, I guess, like to be more open to testing like after the 30-second hero spot is made, or?
It's more so the question is, how do I convince my client that it is better to do the testing upfront rather than to hope and pray that we have the best strategy, they have the best strategy, and that the results are obviously the only thing that, from a measure standpoint, that they're going to look at for the success. Whereas I do, with Swayable, I can do the upfront testing so that they know why it's made a success. But how do I get them to understand that it's better to do in the upfront rather than get it later? If it worked, great, but if it didn't work, then I'm even bigger trouble at that point. So,
right. Even the way you describe it, like nobody likes to just like sit there and just pray for it to work. I feel like like everyone is like loss averse, right? So in your specific situation, you can run the risk of like pouring the media dollar behind this ad and get a 50% of the chance that it will work. And even it works, it's hard to know like what makes it work. Right, if you have multiple versions, like I think like that's the other challenge. But doing those testings up front can not only can you help explain what drives the performance, like what works versus not, and to get to like a better creative asset before you put dollar behind it. I think it also shows like the client that you're putting their best interest in mind. You don't want them to waste their media budget on something that they're not sure whether it's going to work or not. Yeah, and I feel like the technology is definitely available, right? Maybe like it's something that they're not used to, but I think the other thing is maybe like start from something small, maybe not to tackle like their TV commercial, because I know like the process of creating a TV commercial, there's so many approvals that goes into it. It's so hard to even go back and say like, oh, we want to change like a background music or change like the talent. It's impossible, right? Maybe start with something like a social media asset or like a digital asset, that there's like less risk. It doesn't have to be like 100% like successful, but it gives you more flexibility to to make different edits and make different variations. I don't know if
I think you're also lucky in that you are on the brand side, so you get to make those decisions a little bit. And from your CEO and CMO, they are invested in this kind of stuff. So from the agency side, I think it is frustrating. It just is. It's tough to get people to add time to timelines that are already tight. It's tough to find money when everyone's trying to steal all the money for their production budget. I think, again, I sometimes take a marketer's approach and just subliminally share that stuff. I'm constantly in the Slacks, constantly in the emails, being like, hey, check out this cool data thing. Check out this cool data thing. Check out this cool vendor thing. Check out, and just trying to get people to trust me in that way, and then I can hopefully flip the switch when I need it. But it is, the amount of times I've won that argument is a lot fewer than the numbers of times I've fought that argument. I try and tell my team all the time, like, just like creatives pitch 100 ideas and 3 make it to the client, we data people also pitch 100 things and 3 of them actually happen sometimes. So that success rate, you have to be excited about a three wins and not the 97 losses, because we are all in this space that is very much about saying no to things. There's a lot that's going to get said no to before someone says yes.
Geez, I was just going to say maybe you could hope for like an "I told you so" moment, right?
That happens 3 times, but.
All right, maybe one more.
Hi, I'm Neha. I work on Russ's team. For personal interest, I'm like super intrigued by the partnership and influencer world. I'm curious to see, in a world where it feels like it's getting super saturated, it's becoming almost a formula that a lot of influencers are following, probably because managers are managing more than one person and telling them the same information. I feel like as a consumer, there's a lack of interest. When I see an influencer post, I'm like, as soon as I get the hashtag ad, I'm like, I don't want to know what you're talking about. So what has worked for you guys in terms of like who, what, and why you're choosing a partnership, and like how has that evolved in the last like even 6 months? I feel like there's so many influencers that are coming up. Maybe it's because I'm in New York and I'm seeing the same influencers over and over again. There's a whole conversation about that, and like experiential stuff too. I feel like it's the same group of people that you see in a room and you're like kind of tired of it. So how has your approach changed? And like, okay, consumers aren't really liking the 5 people that everyone is working with. Like, we need to get a little nicher or like get to them in a different way. Like, so what has worked for you guys so far?
So it's interesting because I think it comes down to brands. Brands are dictating so much of what influencers doing and saying and that sort of thing, right? I think influencers can be their own they're the best media planners in a way, right? They know the content that's working. They know the content that resonates with their audiences. They know that another "get ready with me" isn't what they want to see. But unfortunately, we might have a clothing brand that wants to have like another haul video, right? So I think it's one of these things where being able to use technology like audience-based data to help inform so that we can sort of identify the right creators to do that. I think being able to test the right content and being able to proof that out to brands, being able to leverage AI so that we can do the briefing process in a way that resonates a little bit differently and helps identify what pieces of content are going to work well with the creators. At the end of the day, it needs to be a little bit audience and in proxy creator-led, right? Like those audiences only exist because those creators exist. And I think there's a little bit of a blind spot that brands have that they know what is right for their audiences, right? A little bit. So I think that's why you see a lot of that duplication or duplication across influencers or brands and that sort of behavior. I'm trying to change from a strategic standpoint how brands think about them as a channel, as partners, as sort of the content that they're pushing out there.
And it is like a completely different paradigm. Like every other media channel was buy media space, put content there. And it's going to be hard for brands to realize like you're releasing all control here. Like this is not your really document. This is their document. I'll also say Neha is an influencer, so if you're looking for Add to your roster. She has a lot of followers.
Well, and it's like, how do you manage, like hundreds of niche level creators, right? These are big problems that brands have to solve for, and how can technology and help us in that pivot too.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you to our lovely panelists, and thank you so much to the Swayable team.